quality. Before we get started with the introductions, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Mark Feld. I run the Riverside Experience. Our mission is to bring the real estate community together with high-quality educational and networking events. We're also a division of Riverside Abstract, one of the most active title agencies in New York City. We're a 1031 qualified intermediary, and we also do cost segregation studies. So, this panel is going to discuss one of the lesser-known aspects of opportunity zone investing, and that's investing in businesses. The vast majority of opportunity zone investments that have been made to date have been in property, and that makes sense. The qualified opportunity zones are geographic locations. Properties are located in a geographic location, and the rules and regulations are pretty clear, pretty easy to understand. But as I was doing my research, when it comes to investing in businesses, it's a lot more murky. There's a lot more gray areas. And in fact, when Steve asked me to moderate the panel, at first I was flattered. But once I started doing more and more research, I realized that I was probably the only person that would have agreed to moderate a panel on the business side of it. So I'm going to talk for one more minute. I'm going to give you the high-level rules and requirements for investing in businesses. In a indirect investment or a two-tiered structure, that means where you're investing in a partnership or qualified stock layered between a qualified opportunity zone fund and a business property. The first requirement is that 70% of the property needs to be located in an opportunity zone. So that's requirement number one. Requirement number two is that 50% of the income generated, of the gross income generated, has to be from in an opportunity zone. So those are 50% of the gross income needs to come from an opportunity zone. So those are the two main requirements. Again, there's still a lot of gray area, but we are lucky to have an excellent panel with some of the only people in the entire world that are actually investing in businesses. So I'm going to be quiet, and we're going to start off with introductions. And let's start off with Clint. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your company and the goals.
Good morning. Let's see if this is working. Is this one working? It's better. Hi, my name is Clint Myers. I'm the co-founder of the real estate platform within Revolution, which is Steve Case's investment firm out of DC. Most famously known probably for its Rise of the Rest movement, which invests in seed stage companies across the United States. They take the bus tour around, and they shine a light on a lot of secondary markets where we believe capital is underutilized, and we're trying to fill that void on the venture side. My partner and I came from Hines to start the platform really under that same thesis. And so I would say our main idea, specifically to opportunity zones, are that, for one thing, a lot of these secondary markets haven't had enough office buildings built over the past 15 or 20 years. There's been a lot of housing built this cycle, but not a lot of office, specifically creative office. So that's generally what we're focused on right now. And we do believe that, especially as the rules become more clear, that there's going to be a huge competitive advantage to owning the creative office that's in the opportunity zone, because companies are going to make the logical decision to choose to locate there. So we've got 3 different venture funds that are investing now. The real estate works in conjunction with them to sort of put all these pieces together. And hopefully in the next few months, when things become clear, we'll be a little bit further along there.
Hi, my name is Mark Kennedy. I'm co-founder of Fuel LA. I'm the chief investment officer. And our program right now is kind of a 3-legged stool. We're based on real estate, enterprise, and community. We think the Opportunity Zone is a movement that's going to revolutionize the entire way we do business across America. We think that the policy component of Opportunity Zone is much larger than even what we think in this room. Witness what, mortgage deduction did for the housing market, what the 401k market did for retail investors. We think that a wise man once told me, don't focus on the business side, focus on the policy side. And the United States government moves markets, and we think that people will gravitate towards these opportunity zones, and even though as real estate people, we're not supposed to base it on our tax decisions, we'll get a certain amount of inertia that gets into there. And similar to what Clint does with his program, we focus a lot on the real estate side, but we focus a lot on the shared economy. So a lot of our ventures are co-live, co-work incubators of that fashion. So it's really community-based stuff that happens from there. And then the substantial improvement part will be kind of a perfect storm for some of the facilities we have, because as we all know, it'll be difficult to make certain office projects work without substantially completing it, and you can't get a tenant in line before that. So there will be an opportunity for a lot of these communities that didn't have co-working and incubators and accelerators to have that now, and that's where we're at. And I'll pass it here to Zach.
Yeah, that's cool stuff. My name's Zach Aarons. I'm a co-founder and partner at MetaProp. We are a prop tech focused venture capital fund. We have a $40 million fund that we're currently investing out of. We're investing in primarily seed rounds of young prop tech companies. Our LP base, mentor base comes from the traditional real estate world. So we're trying to tether the worlds together of traditional real estate, institutional real estate, technology, entrepreneurship, and traditional venture capital. As it relates to opportunity zones, we have a lot of portfolio companies who are looking to somehow capitalize on opportunity zones, on partnerships with developers, to essentially go deep into neighborhoods and imbue their technology into large swaths of neighborhoods and create network effects within those neighborhoods. I think one of the challenges that my companies are seeing, and I'm seeing as a venture capitalist, relates to this 50%, and I'd like to get the other panelists' understanding of this better, relates to the 50% revenue threshold. All of the businesses that I've invested in, and between my personal portfolio and the two MetaProp funds, that's over 100 prop tech businesses over the years, they are all looking to scale, ideally globally, but in reality, sort of locally and in almost every case nationally. So when you have that revenue mix, you're a scalable software as a service solution, for example, how do you navigate getting capitalized with Opportunity Zone cash or realizing some of the tax advantages of being based in an Opportunity Zone when your revenue is so disparate?
It's kind of counterintuitive for the program. It's the whole point is to spur economic growth. You can't really limit the amount of growth. But let's talk about geographically. We're going to swing back to Clint, and let's talk about geographically where you are looking to invest, and how do you choose a location?
Well, when we started the platform, so first of all, remember, Rise of the Rest is sort of the overarching thesis that we're investing under. And the rest is technically not Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston. So generally, we think they've got plenty of venture capital, they've got plenty of real estate capital. We have no edge there. So Rise of the Rest technically is everything else. We, from a real estate standpoint, are a bit pickier than that. So we've got a list of 11 cities that we're focused on. And these are areas like Durham and Pittsburgh, Minneapolis, Boulder. So areas that are not necessarily struggling, but we think they can take a step to the next level. And we recognize that, sometimes we think about real estate and we think about companies. And I think generally we think about real estate benefits when the economy grows and rents grow and everything's great. But you can flip that on its head, and you can use real estate as a catalyst for economic growth. Because quite often what we see is the lack of real estate, office space, lab space, whatever it happens to be, constrains economic growth. So it keeps companies from moving to different areas. So there are some companies that would move, I guarantee, from Boston to Durham if there was enough lab space there. There's not. So they're stuck where they are, which is much more expensive. So you can actually flip that. And I think the greatest example is what Dan Gilbert has been doing in Detroit. If you look at that city, which 15 or 20 years ago was a joke, Dan, through putting, $2.5 billion of his own money in to refurbish, I think they own 110 buildings now. Now real estate in that city is used as an amenity to draw people there. And it's beautiful real estate, it just hadn't had any capital put into it. So we're targeting those 11 cities with the understanding that we need ecosystems within cities to survive and to grow new businesses. Real estate is part of that ecosystem, but it's only a part. And so you need all the other pieces as well. So we kind of come at it from a different angle. And so, yeah, as far as geographic footprint, that's where we're starting. I don't think we'll migrate too much further than those 11 cities.
And I'm going to go with one more question for you. So I know that you've spoken a lot about the real estate side. I believe you guys are one of the only people that have you closed on a Opportunity Zone business investment to date? I know that you guys are one of the only people that are actually doing it at this point.
Well, we've been pretty cautious. I think that we believe that our guidance is that the legislation was really intended for businesses. It's sort of morphed, it feels, into a real estate legislation because real estate's easier. It's easier to understand. There's borders, and you say it sits in the Opportunity Zone, so it qualifies. So we've been a little bit tentative. I would say a couple of our partners, the best example I've seen so far is a group that we work with, a venture group out of Ohio, that the venture group owns their office building. All of their portfolio companies are in their office building. They're building a new office building in an Opportunity Zone to move them over there, and then they're building multifamily housing right beside it. So that's a pretty interesting use of the legislation. Now, I think what Zach said is right. We don't feel totally comfortable that, we're not investing in dry cleaners. If you invest in a dry cleaner, I think you'll get the benefit. Like all the revenue is coming from that one dry cleaner. If that's your business, probably do it. We're not investing in dry cleaners. We're investing in things that we want to be billion-dollar companies, and to do that, you need to scale geographically. So we've been a little bit hesitant to invest in things that are going to geographically scale.
All right, let's swing it to Mark, and we'll talk about some of the geographic locations of where you guys are focusing.
Great stuff, Clint. We're pretty much in all the major markets, and we take a little bit of a kind of inside-out approach. We think that the future of work, agile work, is going to kind of change the complexity of how everything it works out. So we think we've got pockets in LA and pockets outside of New York, essentially, that are in their own world because they're an hour and a half of commuting distance from the CBD. So we essentially focus on, we're at that outer ring of where it's just intolerable to sit in your car for an hour and a half. And we're working, arrangements with Microsoft and Salesforce and some of these groups that when we provide through our real estate componentry, the co-working, the incubator fields, we can get them to come and bring jobs to these underserved areas, because in the past, pre-WeWork, they essentially would have to come to these areas and sign a lease and do a 10-year and have their real estate department, all the the mind-numbing minutia that comes with trying to locate a new office. So we think that's the magic of the zone, is we can bring these jobs and these opportunities, because like what Clinton and Zach do, which I can't even come close to touching, is without innovation, I don't think these opportunity zones will make it. I don't think the sustainability it won't cut it, because we can have all the flower shops and all the dry cleaners and bakeries we want. We've already had those, and it didn't work. So we essentially need folks like Zach and Clint to bring this innovation into these underserved areas, and part of it is obviously the capital that will flow for the real estate side, though. So, but like Zach says, there's an issue now about IRS has to come out and give us guidance on this 50% rule, because it really doesn't work. They're talking about now where instead of 50% of all of your revenue, at least 90% of your staff is there. So that's the latest compromise I've heard about that. But without that, this may essentially be just a real estate play ultimately, without that 50% rule eased up, like you had said.
So can we delve into the staff thing?
Absolutely, sure.
So 90% staff, you're shielded from the 50%. income?
That's the rumor that they're.
That's okay.
Yeah, they're talking about pretty much everything. As we call it in the IRS world, a defensible position. So essentially, you haven't because you don't want to get a guy who comes around in 8,000 zones who does 8,700 LLCs in every zone in America and says, oh, I got all these tech outfits, and then gets a $20 million exit 10 years later and goes, oh, by the way, zero taxes because he's filed some kind of LLC and H is one of these zones. So yeah, it's essentially they're talking about doing that, but until they do that, I from my perspective, I don't see how that's going to be a remedy that changes the way we've done business in the past.
Well, yeah, what I would say I would say the bulk of our companies now on the technology side have a combination of in-house developers and then outsource remote work. And a lot of that outsourced remote work is done offshore. Some of it's done onshore in other parts of the country, and their core tech team might be in an expensive city like a San Francisco or New York or whatever. So I think it's interesting. What I like about it is even though it's expensive to hire tech talent, it encourages insourcing of technology teams, and that's going to create, I think, a vacuum of talent, and then hopefully some of these sort of tertiary markets, secondary markets that Rise of the Rest plays in will be able to fill that void, because those are the only markets where you can afford to live if you're a software engineer for $80,000, $70,000 a year, and in New York, that person is going to be drawn to the very, very expensive Facebook, Google, Amazon offer that a startup can't really match. So I think the employment piece is going to be key. I'm encouraged to hear that, because the revenue thing for what I do is not going to work. I may have businesses that are based in opportunity zones because they want to be there for totally other reasons other than tax incentives. I may have businesses that want to partner with real estate developers doing projects in opportunity zones, but the only reason they are looking at opportunity zones is for the density and the partnership. It's not driven by the real estate itself, if that makes any sense. It's driven by the opportunity to come fresh with a developer partner and say, okay, together we're going to buy 30 buildings and we're going to roll out this software. But it has nothing to do with a tax benefit they may receive from doing business in that zone. So those are the two ways at this point they're thinking about it. If we can get this revenue thing figured out, that may change, and there may be an opportunity for me to actually take some of this trapped capital gains capital, set up a sidecar opportunity zone fund of my own, and finance venture capital type deals with companies that commit to officing in those zones for however long you have to do it.
I'll give one example that it feels like could work, but I'm interested to hear your take, is talking to a vertical farming company that wants to build 30 vertical farms, opportunity zones. So that's kind of what you're talking about, where you've got the operating company, you've got the real estate. Worst case scenario, it feels like you could at least structure those as individual transactions. I'm not sure, but if you had the whole portfolio was in opportunity zones, it feels like you could get a bit of comfort there. And then from a real estate standpoint, you're building a vertical farm which has reuse. If something happens to the company, it can do multiple other things.
Yeah. So if you're a vertical farm and all of your revenue comes from sales to distributors, and the biggest distributor happens to also be located in an opportunity zone, that can certainly work. You would have to make sure that, because if you're a vertical farm though and you're selling direct to supermarkets, I don't know how this business works, but if you're selling direct to supermarkets, it may not work because a lot of that would be out of state. But then you might make it on the employee side if everyone is sort of there. There's so many different issues, but that one could definitely work a lot better than, say, a software as a service play. You just have to massage it.
So this one's going to be for Mark. Can you tell us a little bit about how you guys are raising capital, and have you thought about what would happen if any of your investors want to exit early? want to exit, there's a 10-year life, or a minimum of 10 years to get the benefits. How are you guys going about that?
That's a good question. Right now, our capital is coming from high net worth family offices and a couple institutional players. But that's a very good question on the exit part, because we know that we're going to get situations where folks are going to need their capital.
Well, before we get to the sorry to interrupt. Before we get to the exit part, just like a one-off investor, how would you deal with people that want to leave early? We'll get to the exit because that's going to be actually a whole separate discussion.
That would be a penalty phase on their funds, so there'd be an early withdrawal. So they wouldn't be able to recoup any of the tax breaks, but they would still be able to recoup any kind of appreciation, but it would be taxable. So essentially, it gets a little bit tricky on how you how you do that, and I think you almost have to create a secondary market that allows people to, like a tenant in common, where you can navigate in and out of that real estate investment. Because some folks plan on holding it, but a change in their economic conditions and they can't. So.
Mm-hmm. And Clint, what are your thoughts on that? Or first, let's go back to how are you guys raising capital? And the same question with regards to if any investors want to leave early.
Well, I got an email about an hour ago warning about this line of questioning. So what I will say is the traditional Rise of the Rest fund is backed by, and this is all public, so it's fine. Yeah, mostly Steve's friends, which is different than most of our friends. So it's backed by Michael Bloomberg and Jeff Bezos and Eric Schmidt and those folks who I think recognize, who have benefited from what we're talking about, which is the clustering of talent in a small number of cities. But then also recognize that that can go too far and it's not necessarily healthy, and that there's an economic thesis to go the other way. So that's generally the type of investors we're talking about. And I think those are the right type of investors who generally have gains that are accessible. A lot of wealthy people can't access their gains. They're tied up or various reasons. It's kind of hard to get them. So you need to have gains that are reasonably accessible. And you can be kind of flexible and think long term. I will say on time horizon, we've been happy because we think that real estate should be held long term generally. And sometimes it's hard to get investors to think that way. They're more IRR driven. But this legislation has been good because we kind of go in and say, no, sorry, you have to hold it. The fund's 12 years, you have to hold it. So that's been good for us. So we've analyzed a bunch of different possibilities. I would say the principle we've moved towards on structure generally is the simpler you can make it, the better. I think there's enough moving pieces in the legislation. Simplify the structure as much as you can. I think we'll thank ourselves in 4 or 5 years that we did that.
Okay, and Zach, what about you when it comes to raising capital?
We don't raise any opportunity zone capital. We are a venture capital fund, so we raise money. We're a little bit different because we're a sector-specific venture capital fund, so the bulk of our limited partners are institutional real estate investors, and they invest with us for both ROI appreciation, hopefully, and then also for NOI margin expansion through using the products that are being produced by our portfolio companies, trying to create this sort of virtuous cycle. But none of our capital is opportunity zone capital, and the bulk of it is from institutions off their balance sheet. So we have high net worth individuals in our LP base, and some of those people I'm sure invested with money that was capital gained from somewhere, but it's taxed in the exact same way that any traditional venture capital fund would work from a tax perspective.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell us about one of the highlights, one of your most exciting investments that you've made in the history of your company? What's something that you're most proud of?
I love all my children equally, but I'll say I have a few businesses in my portfolio right now that I could talk about that are looking to capitalize on opportunity zones. One very interesting one is called WhoZip. It's a software that connects the real estate single-family home wholesaling market. People who are essentially professional house flippers, provides them tools to do their job better. And it also connects those people to capital. And there are a lot of these homes that can be renovated in opportunity zones that he wants to plug into. They actually changed the regulations on how you value the land and the building. So it made house flipping actually make sense now. They changed the regulations to, it doesn't work in every case, but house flipping became more palatable once they allowed you to separate out the land value from the value of the building, and then you just have to double the building value, not the entire kit and caboodle, if that makes sense. So that's a business looking, again, he's not an opportunity zone business, but he's looking to capitalize somehow on a capital infusion into those neighborhoods where he's already doing business. Another one is a company based here in New York. They're called Blueprint Power. They look to turn commercial buildings into power plants. Their software allows a real estate owner of a commercial building to turn energy, which is typically an expense, into a revenue item by either selling to other buildings, P2P, or selling back to the grid wholesale in certain markets where this type of regulation permits it. There are multiple states. Anyway, a lot of those areas where the energy regulation has come around also happen to be, shock, shock, in opportunity zones. She wants to partner with real estate developers, go deep into these zones because her software works better and makes people more money when she has 30, 40, 50 buildings selling to each other P2P than when she has one or two disparate buildings all around the city. So those are two, I'm not going to say all my companies are equally awesome, but those are two that come to mind that are relevant for the opportunity zone conversation. I have others, but I'll spare you.
Okay, and Clint, are you guys combining any of the other tax credit, like the new market tax credit and low housing income tax credit with some of the stuff that you guys are doing?
We've talked to a few local developers that generally we're, on the real estate side, we'll be working solely with local developers. And the areas of cities we're looking at, say in Columbus, an area called Franklinton, which we really believe in over the next 10 or 15 years, but isn't there yet. To do things there the past few years, you've had to use new market tax credits specifically. And so in that case, we will look to combine them. I think, again, we want to strive to simplify as much as possible. New market tax credits are not that simple to do, and then you layer on this opportunity zone. But where it makes sense, absolutely, you can double or triple down on those.
Okay, great. I think Steve, we're gonna go to some questions from the audience. So if anybody has any questions.
Combination of round up, but with the historic.
Steve, do we have a mic or something that we could? Hang on. We're gonna.
Okay, so outside of talking to you guys directly, for a company that is doing real estate-related things, energy-related things in opportunity zones, what do you think is the right way to get started talking with corporate-level investors for our company to roll in these advantage of the opportunity zones into an investment into a company we would have? I mean, besides just talking to you guys.
So from an investor perspective, I didn't get that question.
What do you mean by corporate level? You mean venture funds?
Venture seed, angel, whatever.
Show them something that makes money. Exactly. Show them something that makes money.
Yeah, something eventually will make money. I don't know. We can talk about it. You got to have a good team, good pitch, good product. I got to like you. There's a lot's got to go into it.
Sure. I mean, it's the standard venture pitch. I guess more of, is there anything that we need to prepare specifically for working with somebody who is thinking about venture investing in the context of opportunity zones?
No, I mean, none of us know what we're talking about yet. So
all right.
I think coming into a meeting and like strategy might backfire, but I don't know. I mean, I don't sound like I know what I'm talking about a number of different issues, and I don't know what I'm talking about with regards to this because no one has any idea how it's going to play out, and that's an unfortunate reality that we're at in 2019. But it seems like things are moving in the right direction.
Hi, Zach. You mentioned energy regulation also in these OZs. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What you mean by that?
Yeah, again, not something I'm expert in, but there has been deregulation in various states as it relates to solar and cogen and different types of energy that allows players like a startup to engage in selling energy either back to the grid or to others or to some combination thereof. Flipping the paradigm on how energy was distributed in those states, and it's happened in New York, it's happened in California, it's happened in New Hampshire, and the bunch of states, Minnesota, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of places where there's overlap with the opportunity zones. More than that, I know just enough to be dangerous and say something wrong. Okay?
Good morning. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thinking about the rumors you've heard, have you seen anything to suggest that nonprofit schools might be able to benefit from some of the Opportunity Zone business investment coming?
Well, not directly because they're nonprofit, but yeah, you're gonna, again, the Opportunity Zone is coming to underserved areas, and it's gonna hit it with a wallop. So on our part of our business also is we've been, as you guys well know, Amazon has turned into a verb, because if you don't go in some of these areas and you don't have your community relations, you don't have the impact you're going to bring to your community spelled out quantifiably, you're going to get Amazoned. I mean, the Me Too movement has caught up with social activism, and if you're gonna, because a lot of these folks feel that like we're diverting rich person's capital from the Treasury to real estate, which is somewhat true, but there's still an element of if we're going to divert that money from the Treasury, and you're going to get a loan from the U.S. government for 10 years, and you're going to get all your carried interest tax deductible, you better have something you're bringing home. You better have something for nonprofits and schools and whatnot. And in LA, we're working with LA Trade Tech, USC, to try to bring, and I know Mr. Bezos has got a day one fund where he's doing Montessori and homeless and stuff like that. So we think there's going to be a component of private capital that will flow into these zones that will assist the nonprofit capital. So it'll be as Zach calls it, a virtuous cycle of giving, but it has to start with this public policy piece of being able to move this inertia of capital in these areas, and then it will serve to the benefit of some of these nonprofits and some of these B Corps, hopefully. And that's the ultimate goal of that thing. Good question.
I would also add, in our conversations, some of the more forward-thinking and active groups have been the foundations, the larger foundations, Kresge, Rockefeller, Milken, so groups that are willing to put in very risky capital, first loss capital, to catalyze some of these things. And so that's an avenue, depending upon what you're trying to do, you might want to pursue. They won't capitalize the whole thing, but it's a whole lot easier to bring in private capital behind it if you have a Kresge or whomever that foundation is, and they're thinking a lot more holistically about these problems.
Yeah, one question up here in the front.
I know at this point the details are still fuzzy, but do you heard any rumors or you have any idea of when this will come to fruition and investments would actually be able to start closing and things will really start being able to happen? A timeline?
Well, the regs are.
Do you mean for companies?
Yeah, and investors. So when would the IRS regulations be, ironed out, and guys like you would be able to actually start moving and closing deals? Do you have a timeline when you think that would happen, or it could go on for another 5-10 years?
I don't have good sense. I think that after lunch there's a Treasury guy.
Yeah, I mean the regulations are what they are today. So you can today raise Opportunity Zone capital and invest in the dry cleaners. That's totally fair game. So it's not necessarily that there are no regulations and it's the Wild West. It's that the regulations don't match up with any sensible venture capital strategy. Does that make sense? If I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting on this panel. I would be doing something else entirely more spectacular. Promise you that. I have no idea. Do you guys know? These guys know. He knows. Yeah, the mooch knows. The mooch knows. But is he still there? Yeah. This is the wrong panel to ask.
I'll bring it back to Opportunity Zones. That's a question for Mark and Clint. I want to applaud your efforts for looking into creative office in the secondary markets. In screening those areas, what other components are you looking for? Are you looking for transit? Are you looking for community buy-in of urban parking ratios? What kind of stuff?
Well, I think he knows more about that than me. Clint, you went.
Well, it's a good question. So the question is, what are we looking for when we decide what areas to put in some creative office incubator space, whatever it happens to be. You want some sort of measure of economic vibrancy that's already there, and so you can get there a bunch of different ways. I mean, if you're just looking at metrics, we would look at what is the current rate of business startups, what's patents per capita, what's the education level. Quite often, what we find interesting is if there are universities nearby, that becomes a steady flow of both people and ideas. And so the tech transfer from the universities out is often stopped and sort of needs some of that. Then we'll just look at plain old, you can find how much of this space exists. I think, don't quote me, but I think in Pittsburgh, say 1.5% of all office space is some sort of co-working shared, and in New York it's more like 4%. So you can get that number and go, that doesn't seem right. That just seems like there's more people doing it, but it doesn't mean there's more, the percentage of the demand should be that much smaller. So, and then for sure, we will want to figure out who's going to run this thing and who's credible locally. Not WeWork. We don't want WeWork. You want the local groups that are really passionate about owning it and are going to be a local stakeholder for a long time. So groups like in Durham, there's one called American Underground. You go to a lot of cities and there's some version of that. And then there's some larger national groups that are more of that mindset. But that piece is crucial, because if you just build the creative office and just kind of let it go, then it's not going to work. So I think we probably start with, look at some metrics. Where is there a shortage of it? Who can we work with locally to develop it? Who can we locally work with that's going to run it, that's going to get everybody bought in on the whole process?
Yeah, and we look at transit. Transit is a big kind of determination for us too, and obviously talent. And that's why, to Zach's point, it's like, the old adage where it's like, congratulations, you just got an engineering degree from Stanford. Now you can afford a studio apartment in San Francisco with a roommate. So there's essentially a reality. That's why Lexington and Syracuse and all these places are catching fire in Nashville, because you can actually, you don't have to live in your car. You can actually live in an apartment and engage in a normal life. So the transit, but actually a decent amount of brain talent and academia, and Jack knows a lot about this stuff too.
Yeah, and commitment. I mean, government. We were with our. I did an event last night for the Columbia Business School called "The Robots Are Coming." It was all about robots in the construction industry and 3D printing. And I invited one of our portfolio companies who's based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and that city has exploded because they've given every business 1 gigabit of internet speed. And so any business that moves, and the quality of life's really good, and prices are low, et cetera, all the normal reasons. But just from subsidizing the internet and making a big deal out of it, they've gotten a lot of businesses to move there. And then they got a couple big incumbents. Volkswagen, I think, built a deep automation plant down there. So it takes 1 or 2 incumbents as well to make a commitment to the area. So if you have the nexus of incumbents willing to spend money, which typically leads to new housing being needed to be created, coupled with a sensibly pro-business administration, coupled with a temperate climate and good schools and low living expenses, you can have a pretty vibrant technology and innovation culture, and I think pretty accretive formula with the core asset value of the real estate within that area.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much to our panelists for joining us today. Thank you to Steve. We are sponsoring the CLE credits, and there's 4 credits. So if you're an attorney, you should go to the front and make sure to sign that up because you get them anyway. So again, thank you all for listening to us today. Thank you.